Good evening. My name is Kwaku Osei-Tutu, AP African American Studies teacher, African American History teacher at Union High School, and I want to welcome you to this Juneteenth presentation panel discussion on Juneteenth, which we call Reflecting on Juneteenth, Honoring Our Legacy and Advancing Social Justice. We come to you from the host, the Roots Black Excellence Club of Union High School, Township of Union Juneteenth Committee, and KB Events. And when we talk about Juneteenth, let's first tell the story. We have to start with the name Juneteenth. What is it? A lot of times people wonder, why is it not just called June the 19th? It's called Juneteenth because it's a combination of the date June and 19th. Some people wonder, why combine it? Well, there's really two reasons. You have to understand that for the people who were enslaved at the time, they were not first natural-born English speakers. And many of the languages that those people came from, to speak English was very difficult, coming from the type of language systems that they came from in Africa. So often when you're learning new languages, it's much easier to combine words rather than separate them. And thus, that's why you have Juneteenth rather than June the 19th. So that is the reason for the name Juneteenth. So let's proceed forward with what's important about this date, June 19th. Many people believe that slaves were freed by a document called the Emancipation Proclamation. Unfortunately, like many things in American history, that is more mythology than truth. We have to understand that the Emancipation Proclamation was written by Abraham Lincoln in the midst of a war. And the purpose of a war is to win it. And you'll essentially do anything that you need to do to win that war. The Emancipation Proclamation was a part of this. It was a political document, an executive order designed to win the war. It really was not designed to free anyone. And when you really analyze it and break it down, and I'm sorry if this is tough for some people, if you break it down, it really was written in a way that wouldn't free anybody, because Lincoln was in a dilemma. You had the states that had rebelled against America, the Confederacy. But you also had states that did not rebel, but they maintained the institution of slavery. It was important for Lincoln to maintain that balance of keeping those states within the Union because they were very strategic in their position. I'm talking about Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. He wanted to keep those states within the Union and prevent them from moving in and joining the South. He could not free anyone if he was to do that. So he wrote a document that sounded very good, political document, in which he freed all slaves, all people who are enslaved in areas wherein the people shall be in rebellion. In other words, the Confederacy. The problem with that is he had no control over any of those areas in the Confederacy. But the areas that he did have control over, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, and some parts of New Jersey, believe it or not, none of those individuals were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. So it was more a political document rather than a true paper of freedom that many people think it was. But it still was in force, and once the Union Army began to achieve victories in the Civil War, and it took some years before this happened regularly, they were then able to use this document because it was an order from the president, and they were able to begin to free individuals in those areas of rebellion. Now, if you know geographically, Texas was the furthest west of all of those states. So it took the Union Army many, many years to get to Texas. So a lot of those enslaved people did not really have the opportunity to free themselves, which a lot of them had been doing anyway. But it's easier under the protection of the Army many of them didn't have that opportunity until the Army got there in 1865. So now, let's go now to the date, June 19th. The more important date, though, is actually June 18th. And I talk about this in my book here, Juneteenth Resurgence. On June 18th, that's really the critical date. That is when the first Union troops arrived. Now, most people don't know about this for various reasons that I talk about in the book here. On June 18th, there were units of the 28th and 29th United States colored troops that arrived in Galveston on June 18th. And they began to enforce the order of President Lincoln, which was to free those individuals in areas of rebellion. On June 19th, the overall commander of that region, his name was General Gordon Granger, he arrived and he issued an order called General Order Number 3, informing the people that they were now, that the Emancipation Proclamation had freed them and that slave masters were to adhere to this proclamation. And that is Juneteenth. Some may say, well, why we celebrate June 19th and not June 18th if that's when it began? Well, I talk about that here. I'm not promoting. I'm just telling you, you have to really look at the evidence. What's the difference between June 18th and 19th? Those troops that arrived on the 18th, there were some things about them that maybe American historians didn't really appreciate or like. So as a consequence, it wasn't until June 19th when General Granger came and issued his order that historians took note of that. So June 19th becomes the date that we celebrate. All right? So when you think of it in that way, you have to look at the individuals and realize that there's a great amount of patience going on. So when we talk about what does Juneteenth mean, to me, Juneteenth means it represents patience, it represents belief in one another, it represents perseverance, it represents resilience, and it represents dedication to one another. Because when those United States colored troops arrived on the 18th and saw their fellow people enslaved, it was their dedication to their people that influenced them to begin to free them, to let them know that, this is over, you are now free. And can you imagine the pride that those people felt seeing individuals that themselves had been enslaved at one point or another, now back as soldiers, freeing them? All right, so that is what Juneteenth means to me. So I want to stop at this point and introduce our wonderful panel here. All right, we're going to start from my left. We're going to start with Mrs. Patricia Bridges, guidance counselor at Union High School. Good evening, Ms. Bridges. And then right here to my immediate left is Ms. Courtney Dover, assistant principal at the Summit County Educational Services Commission. Good evening.
Good evening.
And to my right here is one of my ex-students, one of my best ex-students, rising senior at Kane University, history education major, Miss Annie Exey.
Hi.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And to my far right, one of my good friends, former colleague of mine, now a guidance counselor at Summit Public Schools, Mr. Michael Mays.
Good evening.
All right, so I'll begin the way I'll do the panel is I'll start this round, this question from my left, Mrs. Bridges, and then I'll go through, and then I'll alternate in the next question and start with Mr. Mays. All right, guys, so that's how we'll do it.
Okay.
So I just answered what Juneteenth meant to me, so that's the same question. What does Juneteenth mean to you, Mrs. Bridges?
I'm so glad that you mentioned patience, resilience, dedication. And Juneteenth is a shift, if you will, that was thought out, planned, and executed for the freeing of a people, and not just a people, but a people that was proud, noble, but now in a place that is foreign, working, enslaved, as a product, as an object of ownership. And I'm always going to come from where it is the social aspect of a people, the identification and re-identification that they must have experienced. What Juneteenth means to me personally is a responsibility to continue the legacy of education as far as what it is historically, socially, promoting the idea of freedom, of fellowship, of dedication to one another, of covering one another. This generation that is and is to come must know that what we went through and what has been can happen again if they are not educated.
Okay, Ms. Dover, same question.
Wow. So I really love what you said, because as a former history teacher, so I'm an administrator now, but my roots are history. I was a history teacher. I taught African American history. So it's my passion, and I am a constant believer that history repeats itself. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter in what form or fashion, it will always repeat itself. And so when you see things that market, and I use this word because I've also taught economics, when you see that they market Juneteenth as free-ish since 1865, it's because history repeats itself. Mm-hmm. We as a people, our socioeconomic demographic, are free-ish. We have not seen economic freedom. We have not seen socio-freedom of any type ever, because when our people in Texas were told you're free, they looked at us like, what does that mean? And now they experience the same thing that their predecessors did in the Confederate States. When they were told they were free, they're like, okay, so what does that mean? 40 acres and a mule never happened. As a matter of fact, when it was given, hence you had the Ku Klux Klan that came in and said, let me teach you about what this is not going to be. So what Juneteenth means to me is constantly reminding our youth, and it does not matter what your race, color, gender is, what your economic status is, it is reminding our people as a whole what history has taught us and what not to repeat. That you need to be free of the chains of racism, free of knowing that you are not a slave to anyone else, whether it is your job, whether it is of anyone trying to control you. You need to be your own person and understand that is your place in life. Learn to be independent. Learn to promote independence and move from there. Do not let history repeat itself, at least not that part of history. Yeah. We need to promote not letting that piece repeat itself.
I love that. That was very well said. I like that you mentioned free-ish since 1865. That's something I've been seeing like on T-shirts and everywhere. But it's true, because initially when I think of Juneteenth, I think of the word like liberation. But I understand that it's not like liberation in its entirety. It's kind of like that first step, like for our people. It's that first step through the door. When I think of Juneteenth, I think of all the work that was done for that, the 13th Amendment to be passed, and all the work that was done after that. I just think of it as kind of like a consistent effort towards freeing our race, a consistent effort towards freeing our people, and giving ourselves a name, giving ourselves like a portion in this society. So that's how I'll define Juneteenth.
For me, Juneteenth has a special meaning. I think of it as the resiliency of our people. celebration of the resiliency of our people. One of the things that I'm mindful of, I think about Frederick Douglass. He had a piece he wrote about what does the 4th of July have to do with me. I think I'm paraphrasing it. And I oftentimes think back to when I was a little boy. I grew up in West Orange, New Jersey. My family was the first family to integrate the school district at that time. And I remember the struggle we had just to go to school. The names I was called, beat up, kicked, in the late 60s, early 70s. And I say that, I think about resiliency because our people helped to build this nation. The wealth of this nation was founded off of the sweat and tears of black people that were brought over in chains. And we have such a rich, rich history. And as you said, Mr. O, there was no coincidence that those brothers were there, the troops were there in Texas at that time. They must have been thrilled to see, especially as men, to be able to be in a position of power to free their people. We've seen in this nation, we've seen our women raped. Our families have been torn apart. We've come through so much. So for me, especially as an African American, growing up, I used to go to the St. Patrick's Day parade and sit there and just watch, or Columbus Day parade, and say, where's our people's day? So when I think about Juneteenth, I think of it as a badge of honor and the resiliency of a people who can now celebrate what it means to be black, what it means, and we come from a rich tradition. And I love what you said, we have, our fathers served in the world wars. They fought the battles. People died for us to vote, to be able to have the opportunity to vote. So all of those things now have morphed and come together and have come forth. But if we're not careful, we can forget that history can repeat itself. And I see a boldness in this nation right now where people are calling people racial names. It used to be frowned upon, but now it's coming back with a vengeance. And we have to stand up as a people and say, no, that's not going to happen, not on this watch. So I think of it as the resiliency of our people who have overcome time and time again and will continue to do so.
All right, Mr. Mays, you're still up, so hold on. Now, Mr. Dover alluded to the economic issues that African Americans have in this country. So that leads us into the next question. So in what ways can youth and adults contribute to honoring and preserving the legacy of Juneteenth? And when we think about that, we got to understand the legacy of what you all articulated. Sometimes it gets commercialized in this country. So how can we contribute to preserving that legacy?
Well, I look at it like Black America, we are the biggest consumers of anything, right? So a lot of the other cultures try to emulate what we do. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to, in our own communities, make sure those dollars that we are spending stay in our community time and time again. We need to go back to Tulsa, or where we have our own banks, our own food markets. Why do we rush to the mall and spend somebody else's neighborhood or somebody else's place when we have it right here? We can have it right here. We have to start to learn how to invest in ourselves. I was blown away a couple of weeks ago. I was listening to the news report of the state of Florida where they were talking about HBCUs in Florida, how $1 billion of that money that was earmarked for HBCUs didn't get to the schools in Florida. And for HBCUs, we all know they need that money to support, our kids. And I'm sorry, there's nothing more that makes me more proud when I see a young person go to Howard University or Spelman or a black institution and graduate, and they become a doctor or a lawyer. because they're investing in their own going to school. I'm not knocking the WPIs, I'm not knocking them. But when you have a black doctor or an engineer or someone come forth out of that prestigious institution, it really is a wonderful feeling. And then also, as I said, time and time again, we've had the blueprint. We've had the. That's somebody's phone. Okay, we've had, as I said before, we've had the blueprint. There have been communities where people, black people have flourished. Why can't we do that again? Why is it so hard? What's so difficult? We have people who are professors, engineers, doctors, lawyers, right? We can't let communities just redline us out time and time again. An example of redlining is right here in Union, Vauxhall and Union.
Yep.
Let's talk about that. That was redlining to keep blacks out. So, and that was just what, recent. I mean, come on. We need to reinvest in our own people. We need to talk to our youth. One of the biggest things is, I'm a man of God. I love the Lord with all my heart. But we're losing the battle when we have young black men and women who have excellent ideas who come to the church and the church won't hear them. We have to turn to our youth. We have to be comfortable with going with them and listening to their ideas because they're that next generation. Big Mama and them are gone. They're gone. And we have to be able to have that hard conversation where we have to say we need to save our money, stop spending. Our kids, our parents will go out. I know parents that will go out and spend $200-$300 just like that on Jordans. I'm not knocking Michael Jordan, God bless him. But sneakers, for real, when you could buy books, when you could really you save that money for college, you spending, I had 6 kids in my family, 4 boys. My dad would no way spend $800 on some sneakers for 4 boys. No way. So we need to invest back in our own and be proud of that and say, okay, most of our kids, most of our young men, and Pat knows this, most of our young men aspire for what? To be a rapper or NBA. The chances of you playing in the NBA or the NFL are slim to none. So point them in the direction where they become lawyers and doctors and engineers or just successful black men and women. That's what we need in our community.
Annie, in what ways can the youth preserve the legacy of Juneteenth?
Okay. The way I see it is by just educating ourselves. I feel like a lot of times, I don't know, I notice the youth today, we're very impatient, I would say. We kind of just look at something online on TikTok or Instagram real quick, and if it's not appealing, we kind of just be like, oh, okay, no one's talking about it. And I think that's why a lot of our history isn't we don't remember it or it doesn't stick because of that mindset, oh, what is this doing for me? Or no one's reposting this, or is this cool? Is this something that everyone else is talking about? I think we as youth need to learn to step out of that zone, step out of what everybody else is doing and figure out what you need to do, figure out what works for you. And in doing that, you'll grow in ways that you didn't even imagine. A lot of times putting ourselves in these boxes, in these cliques, in these rooms, we're limiting ourselves. So I think as youth, we need to work on having an unlimited education. We literally have Google on our hands right here. We have computers, we have internet, we have so much access that our parents and the people before us didn't always have. And I think we take it for granted, honestly. So it's important for us to just take time, read these books, read these articles, watch a TikTok video, that will give you that insight. And I think it's also important to listen to our elders. And I don't say it in oh, don't do this, don't do that type of thing. I say it in kind of I know sometimes we could be hard-headed, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Or, there's always that one older person in the family that is always storytelling, and you kind of just be oh, here he go again. But sometimes it's good to just sit there and listen to them. You'll be surprised at what you learn. So yeah, like that's how I see it. I feel like it's important to just think outside the box, step outside the box, and truly like figure out how you want to carry yourself, figure out how you want to just stand apart in society. So yeah, don't limit yourself. That's how I see it. And even as a college student, I do, like was mentioned earlier, I am an aspiring teacher. I want to be a history teacher. So like, every time I learn something new, I think of ways that I can incorporate that in my classroom. Now I know it's only, 180 days of school. I know there's a curriculum you have to follow, but like one short article or one certain like excerpt, like you can assign an excerpt, or you can assign a chapter out of a book, or show them a quick video, like give them the tools, give them the resources to truly like indulge into the history on their own. I think that's what's really important. And I appreciate, I believe Mr. Mace mentioned about like talking more, like I think that's really good too. I think it's important for the older people to include the younger people in the conversation more. So not just thinking like, oh, like she don't know what she's talking about, or like when you're my age, you'll get to know what I'm talking about. Like I feel like it's important to have diversity in the conversation, not just diversity in skin complexion, but in age as well. So I think as young people, we should be more educated, like learn more, be more interested in learning. We should listen from our older people. And we also should like find ways to insert ourselves, respectfully of course, into that greater conversation. So yeah.
Courtney, what do you think that adults can do to help honor and preserve the legacy, especially for the youth?
So I think one of the greatest things is that within the last 5 years, Juneteenth has become more popular in the Northeast. It's been celebrated in Texas and the Southwest for a very long time. It's become more integrated in our knowledge bank up north, in the Northeast, within the last 5 years, and that's great. And we have definitely embraced it. And I think it's really important, especially in areas such as like Union, where the population is diverse, that townships are embracing it and saying, hey, we as a township need to have different festivals. Let the town know that we are embracing your culture as well. Not just a small population saying, hey, we're going to, rent this section of towns and throw a barbecue for Juneteenth. The town itself is saying, we are throwing an event for awareness of this holiday because we find it important. So as long as adults start bringing awareness as a community, it's bringing awareness. It's showing that the community appreciates the diversity of their people, which again is very important. If your community does not address the diversity of its people, then it's not a community. So that's the biggest part right there. As adults, whether you're a parent, you're an auntie, you're a counselor, you're a person on the street, you're a person at church, talk to the youth. Let them know. If they're in school, they should know. They have a history teacher. And if their history teacher isn't talking about it, then make sure they know about it. Because again, some individuals are not comfortable discussing cultural events, especially Black events. Let them know, remind them what Juneteenth is. It's not a taboo topic. It's not discussing anything inappropriate. It's bringing awareness to another demographic that didn't know about their freedom for another 3 years, if not more, depending on who their master was at the time, if they want that information passed to them. So again, it's passing the message along because they might not know they were free. And it's 2024.
I'm going to go back to something that Annie said about the intergenerational connection. And I think that it's so very important to recognize as a grandmother how living with my children and the next generation has richly blessed and solidified so many things that they may not know in this generation that's happening right now that I know, having lived through the 60s and 70s. there, words like sacrifice have no meat to it unless we sacrifice. That is what had to happen to make Juneteenth happen. It had to happen to keep a people together in the most dire of situations many times. We want to, but we need to dedicate ourselves to that intergenerational connection, where we learn from one another I'm going to say it, the spice of this generation with the tenacity of elder generations, the quiet persistence of an older person with the hot, let's go power that our youth are bringing. There's a balance that we have to hit. There's a financial, you started, Mr. O, talking about the socioeconomic stat. The one thing I'll start by saying is that our children have much more of an opportunity to learn about socioeconomics and financial wealth and the security that wealth can bring than we did. And so learning from their lessons with the wisdom that can be brought to the table is where that mindset that we need to have. I think that's the most important thing that we can do for one another, is to connect intergenerationally. And how we can do that is to decide to learn from one another.
I've heard several times here about the preservation of the history and maintaining the history and guarding against losing it. So the question is, how can we preserve the history and make sure that Juneteenth maintains its relevance and not become just like a passing fad, as so many other things have? Ms. Bridges.
I think less commercialism with the historic blends that we have, being creative about presenting the history, being creative about how we can go back farther than what we're comfortable with. I think we get to this place where, okay, we can go as far as where we're comfortable, but then we don't go any farther. But that's uncomfortable. And we have to be okay with presenting uncomfortable times, to recognize what happened, to recognize what was going on, to recognize the brutality, even though it's uncomfortable. It's history. And so there's got to be a creative way that we can present what was uncomfortable, that people say now that I would never go through that. No, they had to go through that so that we can be here and pursue a farther vision than what we ever thought we could achieve. But at the same time, I can't go forward unless I remember what happened. I can't go forward and just say, well, that was then, and this is now, and then I'm going forward. I can't. It's not rich. It's not foundational. It's faulty. It has to be a collaboration, a wholeness to what we celebrate Juneteenth to be, and what it can be in the future.
All right, so everyone, can Juneteenth, how can we maintain the history and prevent it from becoming just a passing fad?
So I agree with what Ms. Bridges said, except you do need commercialization because you need that marketability. You need people with the mindset of Spike Lee, who if you can have a Spike Lee and a Tyler Perry who can make a movie to remind people of the brutality and the history that went with it, people need the imagery. They need the visual reminder of what happened. Because best believe people remember how America became America watching The Patriot.
Right.
Because as a history teacher, I've shown The Patriot, and that's the only way the kids remember how we won the war against Britain. As much of historical fiction as it is, because there's so much historical inaccuracies to it, there's enough reality to it that they remember parts of how the war was won. So we can figure out how to commercialize it enough to get people to understand the severities that went to it. Even 12 Years a Slave, that was an autobiography that was made into a movie. People may not have read the book, but as soon as they saw the movie, they went out and bought the book.
Yes.
You know, Roots, people read the book, they watched the miniseries, they watched the spin-off Queen. Like, if we can have people understand that Juneteenth is more than a T-shirt.
That's the commercials.
Right.
That's that.
It's more than, you know, understanding that it was only celebrated down in Texas. Right, because they didn't know they were free, but we also need to understand how that circulated, because people left Texas and came up here. Just like you had the Great Migration when people realized there were no more, there's nothing for them in the South, and they started moving up north and moved to Chicago and everything else. Like, this is the history of our people. They migrated throughout the country to other places. I mean, this is the history of Black America. The contributions throughout history, they need that visual aid to help them understand and remember, so that it doesn't get lost in history. It doesn't become, we only talk about it in June, and, you know, it's celebrated on the 19th. The state of New Jersey determined that it's celebrated on the third Friday of the month, but oops, if your district happens to be done on the 20th, then you don't celebrate it on the third Friday of the month, because you're done, so your district doesn't even have to acknowledge Juneteenth. It's wiped away. So we need to come up with ways that it's the history, it needs to find its way into a history book, which, by the way, our history books, if you aren't aware, are not written in New Jersey. As a matter of fact, they're based on Texas, because our curriculum is the closest to Texas, and New Jersey refuses to write their own. I mean, I just lost my job. But Texas does not like to address topics of slavery, and so even Three Worlds Meet has gotten smaller and smaller in the first chapter of textbooks, and so it's gradual. Juneteenth needs to be addressed in textbooks. It needs to be taught, even in African American studies. It's not really in the textbooks. They need to start talking to Prentice Hall and other textbook publishers and put it in there so that it's taught to students. Granted, educators, great ones like myself and Kwaku over here, probably don't use textbooks to teach. You teach from your knowledge bank. You teach what the kids need to learn, so you just give them the information. You pop it up, say, pull up a PowerPoint of the information that you have in your brain, and you teach it so that they can take notes and learn, but they have to learn at some point. And this is, in my opinion, how we can help them and help preserve information.
I'm so glad that you corrected and clarified what was in my head when I said commercialism.
Yeah.
Because the creative part is about the movies, the visual learning, the context, and how we can present that in a very educationally rich way. It's the other part where I lose the sense,
Right.
you know, of the legacy, the sacrifice
Correct.
of what has been. So thank you for doing that.
Of course.
Thank you.
You two made very good points. To me, when I think of it, I feel it's important. It starts at home. we cannot, no shade, but like, you have to realize when your kids go to school, it's a classroom of like 24 kids, one teacher, IEPs, like, they don't have the time all the time to focus on all of these, you know, topics and all these subjects. They don't have the time to focus on each student, you know, in the way that they would want to. So it's important, like, to start at home. Teach these stories at home, because you cannot expect the world to teach it to your kids. And I think in doing that, we need to focus on just being a bit more intimate. Not everything has to be a wave. Like, not everything has to be like, oh, okay, like, we grilling today? Or like, oh, okay, is this happening? Like, it's okay to just sit down and talk, you know, learn about things, put a movie on, reflect on it. Not everything has to be a big, like, you know, lituation or something. For lack of better wording, sorry, I'm showing my age. But, but yeah, I noticed that, at least for my age group, I noticed unless it's like, so-and-so's going, or this is happening, they're not going, or they're not interested. I think we need to just calm down a bit and pay more attention and, you know, work on that intimacy or being like in that space. And like I said, having these conversations at home with our families, talking to our parents about it. If you're parents and you don't know about it, you know, go on Google, look it up, you know, and bring it to your child, because you cannot expect the world to show it to them. And if they do, it might be in a way that may not show the full truth. So yeah, that's how I would answer it.
So for me, I'm sitting here watching you, Annie, and I told you before we started tonight how proud I am of you, because you're going to be an educator. So to me, I feel that we need to have more black teachers in the schoolroom. And also, I like your point where you talk about we need to pass it down to our kids. Our parents need to talk to our kids and inform them, you know, just how we got over. Tell the whole story. You see in Florida now, they're trying to wipe that out. In Texas, they're trying to wipe that out. And I'm sorry, but you don't, if you see other ethnicities in this country, you're not wiping out their history. It's refused. All right? I look at social media, I look at TV, and I wonder, like, what perception do other folks have of our people? We cannot, our images should not be buffoonery. We have to tell the story of slavery, the way it actually happened. We have to talk about, like I said before, how our families were ripped apart, sold, whatever the case may be. We have to tell that dark side of it, but we also have to tell the progression, like how we've overcome, and talk about the positive things that have helped us to overcome. When most people think of, you know, Black America, they see, they may see hip hop, they may see, and there's nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with hip hop, but tell the progression of our people and let it be a positive image that comes out of Hollywood. Why are we letting other people tell our story and reduce our men down to hoods and thugs? Why are we allowing Hollywood or the record industry to call our women bees and hoes? I don't understand that. So we have to educate, we have to have more educators in the classroom. I know growing up, when I grew up in Orange, most of my teachers were Black men and women. All right? And they taught me the Negro National Anthem. They taught me about Crispus Attucks. They taught me about Frederick Douglass. I didn't even know there were Black heroes, because I grew up in West Orange first, and then I made the transition to Orange, and I was like, wait a minute, there are Black heroes? I had no idea about Crispus Attucks. So for you, my sister, you talking about you're going to be a historian, a teacher, a history teacher. I am so honored, because whoever gets you will get a thorough education, but we need to have more of that. That's what I'm saying, investing that money, those dollars in education and in our kids, and make it cool for our kids to want to teach, to want to be professors, to want to, go into the classroom, because our people are depending upon us. I don't want somebody else to tell my story. When I die, I want somebody to know me for who I am. So I told my wife, call Pat Bridges if I should pass away, because she knows me, because she's going to tell my story. I don't need somebody else telling my story. And it's the same way with our people. who better to tell our struggle than our own? So that's why it's so important that we have educators of our own.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that you mentioned, like, just telling the full story. When I think of it, a lot of stories that were taught, for example, like the Rosa Parks story, like, it's very watered down, you know, and I notice sometimes in the school system, it doesn't broaden. It just stays that watered down story. So if you keep hearing the same watered down story, you kind of just like, you're disinterested. Like growing up, they'll be like, oh, Rosa Parks sat in the white section and, you know, she started a whole revolution, da 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 da. And then as I got older, you know, I just took a class, a New Jersey slavery class this semester, and in that class they taught us like, oh no, like she didn't sit in the white section, she sat in the black section. It's just the bus was full and she refused to get up. Like, but that's, you see how different that story is? You know, it's easier to tell little kids she sat in the white section. But, you know, when you get to like sophomore year of high school, 8th grade, like you can tell a deeper story. You don't have to keep it so simplified. So yeah, I think that's very important to just give the broader story, to show students, like you said, the heroes, the black heroes that we don't all know about, showing them the other side of the story, showing them that, you know, before Rosa there was Claudette, you know, showing that that was actually planned, the whole Montgomery bus
Annie,
boycott. Yeah.
So just so you know, Claudette was never taught.
Right.
So even as I was growing up in the
Yeah.
80s
Right.
and 90s, she was never taught. Because she was not supposed to be taught because she was a
wasn't
pregnant
the face.
teenager.
Yep.
Yeah.
She wasn't the face.
She wasn't going to be the face, and before her there were others.
Yep.
But my recommendation to you as a teacher, teach the students in a way that they go home and tell their parents, because 9 times out of 10, their parents were never taught what you think they should be teaching their children. So teach their children in a way that they go home and tell their parents, let me tell you about what I learned today, so that they can now bring that lesson to the table, because a lot of our kids and our families do not have those dinner table conversations.
Yes.
It's lacking. And you might be the person that brings that tradition to their family. So teach them in a way that they say to their parents, hey mom, or hey dad, or hey grandma, whoever is their parent or guardian, I learned this in school today. Let's sit down and talk, because that might be the way a new tradition is started, and that might be the breaking point where they go, oh, well, you learned that. Let me tell you about how it really went down when I was a kid. That's really how everything goes down, because sometimes things aren't taught. I learned things as an adult that were never taught in school because they didn't want us learning certain things in history, because, again, history is written by the winner, not the historian.
Wow.
All right, at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we have to get to the social justice aspect of this. Can Juneteenth be used to advance social justice issues, to bring about equality? Before we get to that, though, I heard a few times about T-shirts, and here I got this Juneteenth T-shirt on.
Oh, wait, me too.
I'm starting to wonder if
It's not a bad thing.
something's
it's not.
going on here.
No, it's not a bad.
No,
All
I'm
right,
wearing one
right?
too.
This is all right?
Yeah,
It's a represent. Listen, I have mine on too. It's a representation, because if we don't represent, then no one's going to know.
Yeah, it just doesn't stop at the T-shirt.
Exactly.
It does.
All right, fair, I just wanted to know. All right, so social justice, can we use Juneteenth as a way to advance social justice issues? Let's do just free response, anybody, any order.
Yes. And I think when it comes to social justice, we need to define the difference between equality and equity. Because a lot of times, people look at social justice and say, we want equality. In reality, you want equity. Because we can all have the same bottle of water, but you may not be as thirsty as the other person. You may be in a drought, and this one bottle of water will not do anything for you. Where the other person has an abundance of water, and this bottle is like, you know, anything. Juneteenth is one of those moments, and it's really a movement. It's not a moment. It's not just a moment in history. It's a movement. It's in reality, it's an early civil rights movement, because it's a reminder that people's civil rights were being violated, that they were given an opportunity to move and find their freedom and find their place in history. And these people, when you actually look at some of their interviews, some of their owners were like, oh, you're free? Okay, well, do you want to stay? Do you want a piece of land? Like, some of them were really cool with helping them out. Some of them were not so cool. But the opportunities that were provided that were so much different than their predecessors was mind-blowing. And so when you look at that transition, that started a movement to understanding how people can actually be humane versus just nasty human beings. And I think that it shows where social justice can be addressed and it can be used as a movement for the betterment of people.
Yeah, I agree. The way I see it, I don't know, I think, okay, yes, it can be done. And like I mentioned earlier when I said that Juneteenth was the first step through the door, and there were many things that were done after that to get us to where we are today. So with the conversation of social justice, it definitely can be, Juneteenth can definitely be used as like a day to honor that, or I guess to shed light to that. Yes, it's about celebration, it's about, freedom, but how did we get that freedom? How did we get where we are today? After, the 13th Amendment was passed, slavery was quote unquote like over, but then there was sharecropping. After sharecropping, there was the Jim Crow era. Then after, like there was so many like misery, there's so much like agony that was gone through, by our people. And sometimes we don't always understand that. And we think that, okay, police brutality or things that we're going through right now is new. Like, it's not new. It's just a variation of what's been done for centuries. So yeah, that's what I see. I hope that made sense.
Definitely. That's why I keep saying we've been free-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody else on that social justice answer question?
So I feel like this. I feel like, yes, but I look at it in terms of voting power. I feel that Black America needs to come up with a platform that we all can agree on. If the Republican Party wants our vote, this is our platform, you got to meet it. Democratic Party, same thing. I think what has happened is our votes are taken for granted. We're just perceived as people who will vote just one way. We have power. We demonstrated that with our pocketbooks because we'll go out and outspend any other ethnicity in this nation. But when it comes to a platform for the things that we need in our community, we need our communities rebuilt. You go downtown Newark now, I see people hanging out that are not Black till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
Let the church say amen. And I don't have a problem with it, but that's progression. What about our neighborhoods? We have to start calling these politicians out and demanding that they change. And these are the things, this is the platform, like, don't get me wrong, I love Martin Luther King, Jr. I love the I Have a Dream speech. Okay, but fast forward, where are we going now? It's almost like a joke. People say, okay, well, the black folks are only going to vote one way. I'm like this, if I am dating a woman, if I'm seeing a woman, I'm looking at her eyes, her nails, everything about her that makes her attractive. Because my intention is to date her. I want her. We have to have these people, so-called quote-unquote people in power, want us for our votes. We see people coming into the country, they're getting all types of benefits that we no longer get, our folks no longer get. Our young men are not locked up in prison, and we're getting ready, no, I can't say that. Let me stop. We just have to understand that we are in a better position and use our power for leverage for whatever we want, and demand that of our politicians. That if you want our vote, if you want our people, if you want us to, if we want to see real change. I know for my daughters, I have 2 daughters, they're in their 30s. They were so upset by President Biden because of the student loan debt that it didn't come to pass. Heck, I was upset with them because I still owe for one of their loans. And I'm saying, okay, you said that for the young people, but the young people today, they can't even afford to buy a house. A 2-bedroom apartment right down here in Vera is like what, almost $3,000? How are the young people supposed to have that American dream? So these are the things that we have to, we're talking about social economic power and social justice. They go hand in hand. We are very resilient people, but let our resiliency show. Our folks built this nation. I don't care how you say it. We were brought over here in chains. For what? Sugar and cotton. That's what it boils down to. And people's wealth, families' wealth have been built up because of what? Our blood, our tears. And we were promised, as someone said, as you said, my sister, 40 acres in the mule. We never got the 40 acres in the mule. You talk about reparations with Black America, you might as well be talking about Mandarin Chinese here in this nation. Why? I don't understand that. But you'll do everything for everybody else, but for us, you take us for granted. We have to leverage our voting power, and we have got to come together. Build in your own house. Build your own house up. And that means the brothers and sisters, we have to take care of one another. We have to love one another. We have to build our women up, brothers. And women, we have to build our sisters up. I never saw a time before, and Pat knows I'm a minister. I'm marrying couples now in their 30s and 40s. Used to be they got married younger, but now we don't even want to come together. I saw a video where a sister was saying, I don't even want to, sleep with a brother no more because I'm like, what's going on? And that's in Black America. We have got to do a better job about building each other up and demanding the changes that we need and holding our politicians accountable. Or we need more politicians that look like us in power. We need more judges, more lawyers, more doctors, more police officers. And that can be done. We just have to put it into our young people's heart that it's not corny to be a teacher or educator or a lawyer or the mayor of a city. If we want real change, that's where we have to begin.
And to do all that, we have to be educated.
There you
But
go.
we are.
And
We just have to not be typecast.
Right, and continue to be educators of the differences between equity and equality,
Yeah.
of social justice, of what it means, of how there are snares and pitfalls
Mhm.
that we, and I'm not talking about any people, but that we sometimes fall into, and the political power that we have, that we don't think that we have. These are just, and I don't want to minimize it, but educational, foundational things that we all have to understand.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are kind of out of time. We could run all night with this. But what I want to do right now is mention for the audience to not forget about the township's Juneteenth celebration, June 15th, tomorrow, or today probably, when this airs. Very good event. It's going to be good. It's all set up. It's nice. I was going to have everyone do a concluding remarks, but as I said, we are out of time. But I want to thank everybody for joining in with us and all of you distinguished individuals for coming. We're not going to solve this whole Juneteenth thing in one night. There were many things that we could have covered that I wanted to cover. But, when you got a bunch of brilliant people, you're going to have all these thoughts and ideas coming out. And I don't want to cut anybody off, but I thank all of you. I appreciate you coming and imparting your knowledge on all of us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.